Welcome to Rune Soup, a podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal, coming to you from Cyprian. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. Enjoy. Today on Rune Soup, we speak to the dynamic duo behind Hadean Press, one of today's leading occult publishers. I should let you know that Dis and Elizabeth have a pretty good pre-chat game, so I thought it best to just dive in rather than leave some of that goodness on the cutting room floor. Onwards. You got everything? You got a wine? I mean, it's evening for you there. I don't know what's going on.
I've already done my bottle, taking your fine advice.
Nice. Yeah.
Can I just tell you, I wish I would have read your book before I met you at London Occult Conference, because, well, I've only read Chaos Protocols. I won't lie, I hate reading digital. So I'm suffering through pieces
I'll
of
admit to you now, Gordon, I'm going to make a private print copy for us.
So I can read.
I work in the print industry, so I can make a hard copy for us.
But your Chaos Protocols was absolutely lovely. Thank God somebody's saying this stuff. And the bits that I have read of Pieces of Eight, I've just finished the bit where you're kicking off about the animism. Thank you. I hope that gets read far and wide.
I think animism is an idea whose time has come.
I should hope so.
It's it's if I look at the kind of academic stuff that's out there, what I find very frustrating is the sort of milquetoast approach to it. The reality of the fundamental definition of animism is that it's a spirit haunted universe, and if you look at the sort of academic reading of it, they remove that and start talking about how it's about social or collective living and respect for the earth and all this. And you go, it is, but that's because these things are real. Like that experience, and it's just this most milquetoast thing. And I think it needs to be kind of re-electrified with the primacy of a sort of spirit-based engagement with the world and the community, which is essentially the definition. And it's been popular. People have been like, yes, we need to start kicking this around, because otherwise you slide into that Neoplatonic or idealist 19th century Victorian kind of idea, which was fine for the time, but it's just not... It's not how most people are experiencing magic, in my humble opinion.
It's frightening how many occultists and people on the scene don't have a magical worldview, but yet they engage in this stuff. They don't think magically. They don't perceive things in a magical way. They compartmentalize it into that part of their life. They do magic, but that's separate from their life. It's not a holistic point.
I would agree with that completely. When I was, talking to Austin about astrology and so on, why I've kind of reincorporated, which is contentious for chaos magic, an understanding of astrology back into it is, it's how you do magic when you're not doing magic. Magic isn't. If people think magic is, they've confused it with ritual. So there will be less than 1% of your life will be within a ritual space. What are you doing with the other 99%?
I think a lot of the chaots have gotten back into astrology and things that they threw out in the 90s. I mean, when I got into magic and came across the chaos stuff, it was in the 90s, and I think it had passed its peak then. And I could never call myself a chaos magician, because I read a book on, I think it was Phil Hine, and they were going on about using a gonk as a fetish. And I was just sort of, no, you're missing the point. But I've heard Jake say as well that a lot of the chaots have incorporated things like astrological timing, banishing rituals, centering rituals, which were thrown out with the bathwater initially.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, you guys were just talking about Pieces of Eight. I sort of go into a brief part of that story there. It was thrown out in the first place. I mean, straight from Pete Carroll, it was thrown out in the first place because astrology as practiced in the 80s still had that kind of 70s Age of Aquarius twinge to it. And he's like, well, this is all garbage. And it is all garbage. That is that is a dumb way of looking at astrology. But it's been reincorporated back into the parts that work. And that's where I think chaos magic got away from its founders in the 90s. That's
Yes,
what happened.
it did.
And if you talk about Pete, like when I was talking about Pete, well, when I was talking to him about his first books, they were, self-published up north, or, kind of independently published up north, a few hundred copies. This is in the pre-Weiser days. And then once Weiser published them, it got away from him. and it happened just at the time the internet was kicking off. So it got really silly really quickly.
Yes, it did. Yes, I've since bought some of the original books. Like,
but come on, you can't tell me you don't code sigils and things into your website. You can't tell me you don't do that. I was on the Chaos L in the late 90s. It was all about using the internet for magic. I was totally into that. I still am.
No, using the internet for magic is fine. I don't encode sigils in the website, but I deliberately use words and images as a subtext for whatever it is I'm talking about. So there's halfway between art and magic, such as there is a difference. That's all very deliberately constructed. Sigil magic obviously teaches you, or gives you, not necessarily teaches you, but it gives you good sort of gymnasium training in symbolic language, because it's using one symbolic language to create another one. So you end up, after doing it for a while, it's always been good calisthenics. You end up, after doing it for a while, with this way of approaching words and images in a very tactile manner. And so that's certainly in the blog. But no, there's no sigils hidden in the HTML. Just, you were saying something about, I hit record, by the way. I'll work out some awkward way of starting this.
You can ask us if we were weird kids. That's your thing, isn't it?
It is, but because this is the first time I've had like a double guest first time on, I'm going to have to.
No, it isn't. You've had the Scarlets.
Yeah, but they were on before, so I got to ask them about the biography.
Oh, right. I see.
Yeah. So I have to modify the first question. So, Which one of you is the weirdest kid, and why?
Elizabeth.
I was the weirdest kid. I don't know why. I was the weirdest kid because his life was positively normal, except for the few incidents that set him apart as an outsider. And then he discovered magic, and that was the end of that. But I never didn't have magic, so I guess that made me quite weird. I also was raised by my grandparents, who my grandfather was born in 1901, my grandmother in 1904. I was born in 1967, so by the time I came along, they were quite fixed in their ways, and a big old house full of really old things. But this is my maternal grandparents. My nanny wanted to open a gift shop, and that never came to pass. So the house was just cluttered with all of these weird trinkets and little dollies and piles of books. She'd been a school teacher since she was 18. So learning was very much her thing. And I was just surrounded by these stacks of dusty books and china cabinets full of weird old dolls, her doll from when she was a child, a little glass gun, I remember. And the house was just full of the spirits that were attached to these things. It was also haunted by, a standard ghost. Two of them, in fact. One lived in the attic, and there was a lady that played one of the pianos that I saw, and I later learned that my children had seen each individually, and I later learned that my mother had seen when she was a child. So there was all this presence, and then there was this amazing back garden. Well, it probably wasn't amazing, but to me as a child it was. And it was just, there were big trees, there were little trees, there were flowers here, there was ivy there. It was unkempt in bits and very neat in others, and there was a sunken pool that was a cement pool that had crumbled and was all moss and weeds and other things in there, and you weren't allowed in there, but there was these secret corners of the garden, and there were fairies there and all sorts of other, I guess you'd call them nature spirits if you were a pagan, but I just thought of them as, I never really thought of them as spirits. But see, I was raised on fairy tales, so all this stuff made perfect sense. Trees could talk, you'd find animal helpers, there were witches, there were fairies, there were everything, and I believed this. and I never stopped believing it. So yes, that made me quite weird.
I'm interested in what you were saying about the dolls there, because if your grandmother was born in 1904, like, Edwardian dolls are terrifying. They must have been...
You still got one. Dolly scares
I
the
have
hell out
my
of me.
dolly. I got my dolly when I was 4 or 5 from an old auntie, not an auntie by blood, but a school teacher friend of my grandmother's, and I still have her. She's a porcelain dolly, and she scares my husband terribly.
I have to bribe her with chocolate coins and little bottles of wine.
The doll, not me.
Yeah. Although that would potentially work. But yeah.
Yes, Dolly has her own handbag with chocolates in, and she gets a fresh little, airport bottle of wine every so often to keep her.
Yeah, see, I think there must have been a witch at the end of every production line in the factory during the Edwardian era that like haunted every doll that went out. My grandmother collected them as well, and they're surprisingly adult. Like they had their own cigarettes and things, and yeah, this cabinet of terrifying dolls.
Yeah.
Ah, cool. So was this up north as well? This sort of house with the big haunted garden and so on?
Oh God, no! This was in New Jersey. I'm an American.
Really? Haunted New Jersey. Well, this kind of throws a whole different feel on the dolls in the house. We're in like American Horror Story world now.
We are. Yes, we are. Indeed.
All right, so we're going to pick that up in a second. Dis, anything to add? You were an outsider rather than weird.
Yeah, I had various experiences and social events happen in my life as a young child, which marked me out to myself and to others as an outsider. Okay, the anecdote that you want to hear, I think, Gordon.
Have you been abducted by aliens?
I had a close encounter.
Oh, cool.
And I will preface this anecdote with the I think it's Groucho Marx. There ain't no sanity clause.
Yeah, very good.
As a kid, one Christmas, I saw Father Christmas and his helpers. Now, you could say, well, what kid doesn't? But I was in bed, I turned to look out the window, and there was, where we lived, there was a flat roof over another part of the building, and Santa Claus and his helpers were, Father Christmas, I should say, because, I am English, was stood on there, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I turned away from the window, pulled the covers over my head, and went back asleep. Now, yeah, a little kid, you could say I was dreaming, but no, I had recurring dreams as a kid, and there was a different quality to it. And I don't believe in anything, but I do believe in Father Christmas because of this event. And I've had some coincidences over the years at Christmas, and I blame this event for it. Now, like I said, it's there ain't no sanity clause. I don't believe in Father Christmas. That's ridiculous. But this had a different quality to it, and it has scorched itself into my consciousness.
Well, yeah, you can't argue with the experience of your own eyes and so on. So yeah, you can believe in whatever it was that showed up as Father Christmas. That does sound actually quite scary. The idea is scary in the first place.
I have since explored this through magical techniques and various regression things, and I have to class it as an ultraterrestrial experience nowadays.
Yeah, I would say that. I would jump in and go, yeah.
Some of the I don't like actually some of the threads that threw up, should we say. I don't really want to go into in public, but yeah, it definitely marked me out, to myself anyway, as having a connection. But throughout my early life, I had a few events, like I broke my leg when I was about 4 years old, and I was separated from the rest of the class, and I had a helper who helped me. I was the only kid in a Catholic school who, for some reason, one day the teacher asked, "Do you believe in God?" And I stuck my hand up and said no. I refused to pray, so I didn't go to assembly with the other kids. And I kept on having events in my early childhood that separated me out, made me feel like an outsider, that made me realise that I was an outsider.
take like the ultra-terrestrial thing I'm interested in, and I get bits that you can and can't talk about, but we'll see if that doesn't pick up through the rest of the story as we move into the next phase. So you've both described things that would fall under the definition of a broad definition of magic, but when and how did you first get interested in and encounter magic, as in the Western magical tradition, as in the opportunity to experience and engage with it rather than the quote-unquote mere act of living in a magical universe?
1978.
Exactly, to the day. It was March, it was raining, you know.
It was 1978, and my mother had returned from parts unknown a few years before to reclaim me. And we were living in this tiny apartment, and we were in a small steel town just north of Pittsburgh, if I remember correctly. And on her bookshelf, sandwiched between The Joy of Sex and The Thorn Birds, I discovered an ABC of Witchcraft, Past and Present by Doreen Valiente, and it was eye-opening, to say the least. And at that moment, I realized that what I wanted to be when I grew up was a witch. And that started me on a path through all sorts of interesting things, like Aleister Crowley, as you do, some Enochian, and it finally led me in my early 20s to the OTO, the Laces Camp in Philadelphia, where I met the esteemed Jason Miller and other tricksters.
Yeah, in fact, that party that Jason was telling you about on the other podcast, Elizabeth was at that party.
I was there.
Oh, cool.
Yes. So that's how I got into it.
Did you ever ask your mother, like, I get the Thorn Birds and I get the Joy of Sex. Where did you get the Valiente book?
To play at being a witch. My mother was rebelling, a clear case of rebellion against her very Protestant mother, the woman who raised me. Spare the rod, spare the whatever, kill the child philosophy. So she was rebelling. She did dabble with it. All of the women, not her mother, but her father's mother and her father's sister from that line of the family were quite weird. My grandmother taught me how to curse someone by boiling pins when I was quite young, but I didn't pick up that this was anything out of the ordinary. My mother liked to give me the evil eye, so she was dabbling. I took it to heart.
Let's go back to the boiling pins thing, because you just said that you were raised by a Protestant school teacher. It seems slightly out of character.
It was quite out of character, but I think she got it from her husbands. My grandfather, they were Germans. My grandfather, his sister, and their mum, who I met briefly once when I was quite young, very young. They were Germans. They were both, his mum and sister were both midwives and quite weird and spooky. I know more of his sister, my auntie, than his mum, because she died when I was quite young. Obviously, because she must have been 100. But my auntie was, my German auntie, my grandfather's sister. She ran from her home an antiques business, and she had all sorts of stuff from Germany. And she and her mom had been quite German. They moved to America, became citizens and everything, but they returned to Germany every year except during the terrible time we don't talk about. And lots of really old things in our house, and I'm sure they were up to no good. I'm convinced that my grandfather's sister was up to no good, and I think this is where my grandmother got it.
Up to no good?
Up to total no good. I'm sure they were hexing and cursing and this and that. I'm sure of it.
So what you're saying is your grandmother fell in with a bad crowd when she got married?
I think she did. I think she fell with a bad crowd, and I think that's where she got it. I mean, it wasn't anything extraordinary. We had a shore house. She had a shore house at Long Beach Island on the coast of New Jersey, an island there, and we were just in the kitchen. She was doing lobsters in one pot, and in the other pot there was a neighbor who rented a house out for the summer, kind of behind ours, and my grandmother was a bit peeved at some of the tenants this person allowed, and she was just muttering as she boiled these pins, like, these go in the drive, these go on the steps, these go in the doorway, and that'll teach them. It's just like, you are.
So your grandmother, like, do we want to share the no good German spell in Toto? The no good German New Jersey pin boiling spell.
Yeah, if you no good dirty heathens, I don't think there was any anything to say. It was just like the intent of it. It's proper malice. She might have been a Methodist, but she was a malicious Methodist. Yeah.
Ah, very cool. It's interesting to see just how much of it.
I don't want to kill her. She'll come. She was lovely.
But I mean, that's kind of the subtext of. I mean, we were talking before I hit the record button about the episode with Jose, and I was on Richard Hoagland's The Other Side of Midnight last month, and kind of talking about if people kind of unfocus their eyes a bit and look at their own family story, something happened in the mid-20th century where we forgot, like, the idea that you need to recover a magical current from centuries ago doesn't appear to be the case. And you sort of go, hang on, my grandmother used to do that. That was my experience in Australia. It was a Janet and Stuart Farrar book. It might have been Witch's Bible. And I was reading it, and then I gave it to my mother, and she was flipping through, and there's an Irish charm at the back, and my mother's like, "Oh shit, my grandmother used to say this charm because that's the Irish side of the family." And you go, right, that's interesting that there just seems to be, which I find endlessly fascinating, a continuity of, however problematic the term folk magic is, but there's a continuity of it that means you don't need to do some kind of rediscovery or invention of some kind of neo-paganism if you're looking for that authentic connection.
No, you're absolutely right. It's generally there. You just have to see it correctly for what it is.
Okay, so this episode's experimental form, I think, is actually kind of working, given that naturally you guys one day meet in the story and go on to do certain things. But let's jump to this and go from being a ultra-terrestrial experiencer with a broken leg, going from there to how did you first encounter magic, as in, the Western magical tradition?
I suppose when I was about 17, I fell in with a group of people who would get stoned and would party and that. And the people I fell in with were into Castaneda and Crowley and had loads of books on the I Ching and runes and all of the Western tradition stuff. And someone one day gave me a book to read and says, read this section. And read this section and read to the end of the book and then read from the front of the book and gave him back and said, where are the other two? And it was Illuminatus. And Rob Anton Wilson, was twisted a lot of people's heads at the time. But yeah, we were checking out Crowley and Book of Lies, Conks on Packs. I inhaled anything I could get. It just felt right to me. It reminded me of being at school and doing telepathy experiments with my friends when I was in the junior school. And I just thought, yeah, this feels right. This suits me. I remember it's being a kid and going to the adult book section and finding a book on the paranormal. And I've still got some some books on ghosts and that from when I was a small child, and I was into the paranormal stuff. But yeah, I re-encountered this stuff in my late teens, and Illuminatus. Yeah, that was a big turn on for me. But like I said, it was Castaneda and Crowley and a lot of the Western tradition stuff, and we decided to do a ritual, and we did a Dog Days ritual based on Robert Anton Wilson's Dog Days and Cosmic Trigger and that. And a short while after, one of us contacted someone. I think we found it in a magazine or something. I think it was an astrology magazine actually, and we got the Equinox, and it was the Equinox by Jake Stratton Kent and crew, and Jake and Trevor and Penny. It was mainly Jake. It blew me away. It was the first time I'd seen astrological timing laid out, road tested, and nuanced. They had stuff about Fortuna timing, and it blew me away. And the other thing that I still stick with is the English Kabbalah. And I've seen various criticisms of the English Kabbalah as laid out in the Equinox that Jake published, that we're about to publish another book on. But a few years later, I'd moved, and I was with a different magical group, and I got introduced into Enochian and Kenneth Grant there, and we'd started to use English Kabbalah on a daily basis, and it got to the point where we could spot spiky words and phrases. We'd be listening to some music, and someone would shout, "EQ that." There was a track by Apollo 440, I think, and there was a phrase, and someone just said, "That's spiky, EQ it," and it was ravishing, hyperrealism, mind blowing, and it was 418. And the feedback loop with using a living language as a magical Kabbalistic tool was mind blowing, because it created feedback that was immediate. And even though it's very specific to Liberal and the system that Jake was talking about in his Equinoxes, its uses exegesis for Liberal has a specific slant. We found using the language of your thought, the language of your mind, as an English speaker, created these really rapid feedback loops.
Well, yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I was reading the old Jake article on your website before we started recording, and an automatic writing text of intensity like Liberal, one of the, I guess, proofs that someone other than a human was involved in its creation is the fact that it can do these things. And I remember, I actually spoken to Jake about this, some of the criticism about English Kabbalah, and you just get that with the kind of dusty corners that think the world has, the world of magic reached its apogee somewhere in the 1890s. And what I find fascinating about that criticism is that even if you take quote-unquote normal Kabbalah or things like Twilight language or that kind of very classical alchemical idea of the language of the birds, each one of these things is a description of a observation that I think is true, which is that the universe is in some sense structured linguistically. So it can be engaged with linguistically. The idea that one system proves another or doesn't or invalidates it is sort of silly. What is Kabbalah but a system of combinations of words and images that, when you engage with them, allow that a feedback loop or something or a response from the universe in a bizarre way. So from a provenance perspective, I think a lot of the criticisms of English Kabbalah are invalid in that sense. Of course, it's going to work. It's a linguistic system based on a text that wasn't necessarily written by a human.
I think the golden thread that a magician follows to find their results or to find their way amongst the space weather or the day-to-day life. You've said many times on the podcast, Gordon, that it's coincidence or synchronicity, and I have a slight issue with those terms, even though language structures reality and we have to be precise about the way things are expressed. I think the synchronicity and coincidence, the terms themselves, can be unintentionally dismissive of the magical worldview. It was just a coincidence. Oh, it happened at the same time. Whereas the real results, the real things that lead you forward or that mean something to you, can only be a subjective thing. I mean, I've had magical results that have come to me by walking down the street and I've heard a snatch of conversation, and the word that I've heard in that conversation has been a result for me, or has been a clue to me as to what I'm looking for or what I was expecting from some act of magic, whether that be a ritualized piece of magic or a more free-form day-to-day practice or way of being, should we say?
Yeah, absolutely. This would be what we were talking about at the sort of top of the show before the record button, that you spend less than 1% of your life in magical ritual, yes, and 99% of it, in theory, living in a magical universe. So, of course, this is how that works, and it does become... It's probably a variant of a sort of microcosm-macrocosm idea that, of course, your personal engagement or subjective engagement with the wider universe such that you are different to it manifests in these kind of ways.
Yeah, when the volume gets turned up, or when the goddess winks at you through insignificant things like, the amount of change you get at a supermarket, can be a magical result some days. Other days it's just change from the supermarket. It means nothing, but at certain points those things can be significant, and it's following them, it's being able to spot them. I think a lot of the time people do magic and they get results and they don't notice them. They pass them by.
Yeah, I would. This comes back to a which I notice with some. I love getting feedback from people in the newsletter and so on. But what I do notice is, the expectation, and it's what happens when you reverse engineer it. So let's take the example of change from the supermarket. That's quite a good one. Funnily enough, I've had something similar where you go, that's that's the number I was looking for. Yeah, but if you try to systematize that and give it as a kind of recipe approach to practical enchantment, say, do this, deal with this spirit, and then watch the change you get at the supermarket. I think that's why so many fucking spells sound ludicrous, because the first bit is quasi-universal, the end bit is completely individual.
Yes. This is why you can't take magic out of everyday life and put it in the laboratory to prove it, because there is it's like the experiments in the 50s where they gave soldiers LSD, and then they sat them in front of a guy with a white coat and wondered why the soldier had a bad trip. What the fuck did you expect?
Actually, that reminds me, what kind of telepathy experiments were you doing as a kid? Were you doing like full-blown Xenocard stuff, or were you just kind of trying to guess what was on your friend's mind?
No. I remember there was a group of us. I must have been about 7 or 8. There was a group of us sat around the table. I don't know whether we'd been watching Doctor Who or the Tomorrow People or something like that. And a group of us sat around the next, break, sort of like holding hands and concentrating and trying to feel each other's thoughts. I don't think anything came of it, but it was just, it was just another little blip of weirdness on my radar.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's pick up the kind of twin converging story and go back to, you say, So go back to Elizabeth and either the party that Jason Miller was at, and how do we get from
Jason Miller's party?
yeah, and so how do we get from there to you being in the UK? Like, you get to tell your bit of the story from there to when you guys met.
All right. Well, Jason Miller's party was the early 90s, 94, I think that was. And I was in the 90s moving back and forth between Philadelphia and Cleveland for some reason, following opportunities maybe, or maybe running from my toxic mother, who knows. In 98, I landed back in Philadelphia for a solid 3 years, which was quite solid for me. And then in 2002, there wasn't a lot of OTO activity on my end. I had done that, and I'm a completely lapsed member. I didn't resign, but I've been lapsed for 20.
Don't give them the back dues.
20 years. Well, but it's impossible to get in touch with them. I'm like, here, take my money, but they won't get in touch. So what can you do? The magic I was doing was very, very personal, very quiet. I've always been mostly solitary. Just trying to follow the directives the spirits have set for me, keep my head above water, have adventures. So I don't really have a structured path. In 2002, I went out west looking for my family. I lived in South Dakota and Nebraska until about 2000, and it was April 2006. I moved back to Ohio, and then all of a sudden, I'm in Ohio, minding my own business, living my life, la la la, and I start getting these messages that I have to go to England. I just have to. And I was experienced enough at the time to know that you get these messages, and sometimes it's just you have an overactive imagination.
It was Valis. It was definitely Valis.
Yeah,
Clearly.
Sometimes it's wishful thinking, wish fulfillment. Sometimes it's just maybe you're a little bit crazy, and you have to assess these things, as best as you can in whatever framework you know how. And after months of these messages, I just thought, oh, fuck off, I'm going to leap to England. So I sold everything I owned and went to England. And the first month I was there, I met Dis. 6 months later, we actually started to get to know each other. And within the next 6 months after that, I had moved in with him, and we were having the most passionate love affair of the century. That's how that happened.
Okay, it's good. I did say, it's a big jump, but when you say you go out west looking for your family, South Dakota and so on, when you say looking for your family, do you mean like German migrant roots? Do you mean...
No, my father's family.
Gotcha.
My father and my mother both left me when I was a child, when I was an infant. I've never met my father. I just had family stories and whatnot. So I decided to... I also sold everything I owned at that point and went off out west. Wow, so that was the second time I'd done it. I hopped in my truck and just went out to see what I could find, to meet some people, and generally hang out and see if I could trace any roots. Which I did manage to do a bit of, but mostly it was another one of those insane magical adventures that I tend to have.
And I like, because I've done this a couple of times myself, I like the selling everything you own and just showing up. That was like one of the best days of my life was when I did that and landed in Auckland, New Zealand, which I hadn't been to, and it was a good day. It was a terrifying day, but it was a good day.
It's terrifying, isn't it? It's so fun.
Yeah. So when you say you landed in England, did you go straight to London? I mean, because you guys are back up north now, aren't you?
I landed in Lytham, where he had friends, which is in Lancashire on the coast.
Yeah,
it was just random chance.
I'm not familiar with its international airport, so.
I flew into Manchester, I think it was.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah.
No, it was always going to be the north.
England is more than London, Gordon.
I do love
I
the
love
south.
the north. I tried to move up there for years. Yeah.
It's the north. It's the north for me.
Yeah, cool.
Right.
Well, that was the bit I was trying to work out. Like, I was trying to. Where did you learn
I
for
flew
that to happen?
into Manchester Airport. I had friends in Lytham. Flew into Manchester. I don't think I ever saw London until I had to go to the American embassy to change my name on my passport.
Yeah, fair
After we
enough.
got married. I've been there a few times now. It's nice.
It's nice for a visit. Yeah.
It's for a visit. If I had to live in London, I would choose Highgate, but I don't think I could afford it.
Yeah, Highgate's pleasant.
It's lovely up there, isn't it?
It's. Obviously, I lived there for 8 years. I like the town. I did try to live other places and briefly lived in Bristol, but you get stuck in. It has a center of gravity all of its own, and trying to get out. Funny enough, I wanted to move to York years ago. But the only work that's available up there, like if I want to work in a sweet shop for tourists, I can do that. Doesn't appear to be much else. There's the Christmas shop and the sweet shop.
Yeah. Cities do that. They do have a force of gravity. It's why I kept bouncing back and forth from Philadelphia to elsewhere, back to Philadelphia to elsewhere. I mean, I was born there as well, so it was quite the draw.
London is like a marble on the rubber sheet of gravity of England.
But London is a beautiful woman.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, she's a beautiful woman, but she knows how to boil pins.
Exactly.
I had to sneak out. That was the only way. Like I had to sneak out of London because otherwise it just would have rubber banded me back, and it may yet.
Yeah.
All right. So, what was the inciting incident for getting into the wildly lucrative business of magical publishing?
Well, there wasn't really. I decided that we should have a project to work on together.
Yeah.
And it just came to pass that it was publishing because I had experience with publishing. We're like, right, we'll do this. And that was spring 2008. Then I got deported for 2 months and had to sort out visa things. And then it really kicked off in that autumn, October, I think it was, when we went to the Thelemic conference.
Yeah, the Thelemic Symposium in Oxford.
Symposium, that's what it was.
Relaunched that year. And we had quite a magical, synchronicity, coincidental type of event. Yeah, we went down, we went out for a meal the night before, and then I said, well, okay, let's go for a drink. And we wandered down the street and said, well, let's go in this pub. And we went to that pub, and there was Jake Stratton-Kent.
Of course, hanging out in a pub.
So we said, okay, let's hang out here. This seems to be the right place. And we spoke to Jake, and we said, publish with us. And he says, I just signed up with Scarlet Imprint. But he said, but I would really like to get the Equinox finished. So we said, okay, that'll do for the starter project for us.
No, it was brilliant for us because he had recently introduced me to the English Kabbalah, and I was all over it. It was life-changing for me. It was amazing, and I'm still quite the fangirl. And when Jake offered us the last 3 issues of the British Journal of Philema, it's impossible. I have these fangirl moments. Like I meet these people that have done this massive work, and I'm rendered incompetent. But it was lovely for us to have that as the first publishing project. It was just perfect for us.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Well, it's the English Kabbalah thing because Kath's book's coming out soon. The English Kabbalah thing is a bit of a through line.
Yes, yeah. Well, it always will be as long as the material comes to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, on that, so it's interesting you say you got deported for 2 months after you decided to embark on the Hadean project, because I remember talking to Peter and Alkistis about when he was writing The Red Goddess. There's something about it that collapses your life, because obviously it happened to him, and he was writing the book while he still had his normal job, and then as it got towards the end, the project demanded that he could no longer be normal. and that's what happened to them. And it happened to me writing Starships, the first book, the same thing. If you move into it, it has a tendency to control demolition parts of your life.
Yes, this is the thing about doing magic. Especially for tyros, they think they're going to achieve enlightenment, and they don't realise they're going to be kicked in the balls by the universe on the way. The classic definition, the Crowley definition of magic says, about change. So, if you do magic, it's going to cause some weird shit in your life.
Yes.
Sometimes I think it's, especially for an experienced magician, it's knowing when not to do magic, because occasionally you need a bit of calm just to assess what's happening.
Could not agree more.
Just for a day.
The way I always look at it is like climbing a mountain, to be all Crowleyan about it. It's you establish your base camp. You say, right, this is what I understand. This is where I'm at. And then, the library angel lends you a book that says sort of like, maybe you should head up to the next section. So you head up to the next section, and invariably there's a shitstorm that happens on the way. You get blown off course. The space weather changes. You get kicked out of your house. You lose a relationship. You lose your job. And then you get there, and okay, you've got burnt fingers, but you've learned something, and you've established your new law about what it is and who you are.
And people who haven't been through the process, if they were to ask you, would you do it again? You'd be like, yeah, it was amazing. You say as you're literally still smoking because your clothes just caught fire. You'd be like, yeah, this is fucking brilliant.
Get electrocuted, yeah. I'll have another.
So was that? I mean, is a good example of that. Moving to La France Profonde. I mean, what was going on there? I was very jealous of you for a while. Not only because I love France, but 2 euro bottles of wine. Come on.
I saw the house and I said, "We're going to live here." That's how that happened.
Yeah, it was due to my family connections. There was I took Elizabeth to meet my family, and we arrived in the night. And the next morning, I showed her the empty house that was in the little Amo, the little hamlet.
That we
and Elizabeth says, "I want to live there." I went, "Okay, then we're living in France for a bit."
Living there.
So we moved to France for a while. He's still there, We may go back. I don't know. But.
Yeah, I don't know. It was very difficult to do business in France. Everything else was lovely for quite some time, but the final nail in the coffin was our new neighbour. See, now here is a perfect example of magic gone wrong, right? There in this hamlet, there were 4 houses. Ours, his mum and dad, and our French neighbours, a lovely family, and an empty house that had been empty for some years. And this couple that no one wanted as a neighbour were threatening to buy the empty house when it came up for sale, and we were having none of it. So I did some bit of neighbor begone business to make sure they didn't get the house, and they didn't get the house. But when the house did finally go up for sale, we all wished they'd have got the house because what moved in drove us out. I couldn't cope with the new neighbour. So there you are. Let this be a warning. Be careful.
Get what you want.
Yeah, be careful. Jesus.
Yeah, and I don't think I've actually had this discussion, speaking of Jason Miller, with Jason Miller. It doesn't go away. Like, it seems like such a rookie mistake. But how long? It's 20 years now. How long before you stop making rookie mistakes? And it's to Dis's point that sometimes you do need a bit of calm. Like, people get asked, like, I get asked, like, so what is your daily practice? How often do you do these kind of things? And if you think I'm like getting into some sort of evocation situation every day, I don't like. There are less expensive ways to kill yourself. That's just mental. The addiction to the unpredictability, like even when that happens, where you go, I literally caused this. I'm very sorry. It doesn't go away. You still do it again the next time.
Yeah, you will.
And there's something about...
I'll be like, oh, that oil didn't work. Let me try this other neighbor be gone oil. Maybe this one will work. No. No.
All right. So, I mean, you guys have had sort of very different journeys towards the Hadean project together and so on. So what do you think has changed in magic? I guess the most, or the most noticeably, since you first encountered it, sort of winding up and down between the beginning point and this current point in the timeline?
I'd say it's the revivification. Yeah, did I say that right? Yeah, I nearly did. The revivification of the Western current, the reabsorption of the diasporic religions from the New World, which have gotten us back to what we've lost in the Western tradition, which had become a quasi-Masonic, over-intellectualized, too much Kabbalah even, too much ritualized form, and back to the witchcraft, to the return of the old ones, to the archaic revival, as Terence McKenna would say, the living tradition being refound, the spirit-friendly approach, as Jake would say, the more friendly approach to the other side. Yeah.
Elizabeth?
Well, for me, it's the books. It's the books. It's the presence. I mean, you have to understand that my view of it all is, I lived in America. When I started, there was this book on my mother's shelf, and then there was not another book for 3 or 4 years in sight. That was it. That was what I got. I got that one book. You could go to the bookshop. There was nothing there. You could go to the library. When I just started high school, there were precisely 3 books in our local library. Granted, it was a small one, a very small town, Ohio, on what you would call magic. There were a few books on paranormal. My stepfather had an interesting collection of paranormal books, the ones about the ancient aliens and astral projections and ghosts and all this other stuff that I deeply inhaled. But as far as magic like we know and understand it, it was very thin on the ground, and you certainly would not rock up to your local, post office wearing a pentagram. It just wouldn't happen. And so there was that experience. Things got a little bit more out and about as I grew up in America. But what strikes me about England is that because this is a country of eccentrics, like nobody bats an eye. I can walk down the street of this village absolutely decorated in occult jewelry, carrying the big blue brick, and nobody will bat an eye. They'll just think I'm another eccentric northerner. And how is that possible when in other parts of the world people are still being burnt, killed, mutilated for being witches? It's shocking. So this is, to me, is a great revelation. The publishing revolution as well, when Llewellyn started churning out books, that was amazing to me. And I'm still deeply, deeply grateful to all the esoteric publishers for making this information readily available. Because I'm still as much into it now as I was when I was that wide-eyed 11-year-old, and I want to read all of the things, and there's so many things to read.
Our to-read list is ridiculous.
It is shocking.
Exegesis, PKD, you still haven't read that. Oh, God.
Yeah.
But I also need to, if we're going to talk about occult publishing, I have to shout out to the esoteric publishers who are also practitioners, because it's like, I don't know how any of us get anything done. I put this on my Facebook, just in my little private occult list, that you'll be working on your next book, from, I'm working on one from Jake at the moment, Pandemonium. And, editing, looking for typos, and all of a sudden, your favorite saint or your favorite spirit comes along and says, hang on, you're not doing that right now. You need to stop that. And you need to do this right now, and you need to finish this right now. And what can you do? say, no, I'm doing this at your own risk. I've tried that, and it never goes well. So, all of them that actually manage to produce books in the midst of this, they need to be that special shout out. High five, guys, for real.
Yes, trying to go against when the spirits want either a book written or a book published fails. I learned that. And interestingly, it happened with Pieces of 8, where I kept allocating chunks of time, and in some cases entire weeks. And I would sort of sit there and open up the word processor, and nothing. It might as well have been a Japanese keyboard. It wasn't going to happen. And then you kind of get 5,000 words done sometime between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. and sort of stagger to sleep and go, well. And it's when you don't listen, it's like, no, you shouldn't be doing this now. You should be walking by the river. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. I'm like, no, I have a deadline. They're like, nah.
Yes. No, it's just they don't care. They really don't care about your deadline.
Well, if they're helping with it, you kind of have to work to theirs. It's like having.
Oh yeah, if they have a deadline, they care about it.
Yeah, but they also don't understand a kind of project management approach, because time is a less linear concept. So you can allocate all the time you want. If they're not firing, you have just allocated a week you could be doing something else with. And it's taken to book 3 for me to personally realize that any of that sort of author advice you get, that kind of crappy Neil Gaiman stuff about just sit down and every day and write, and you go, no.
Yeah.
I've tried that. It doesn't work.
That's not happening.
Yeah. So, I think that's, funnily enough, they're almost like those two observations are on the same kind of, they're part of the same spectrum, or two sides of the same coin, because the books are a sort of physical representation of the return of, I guess, spirits back into Western magic, from them being considered by the Mathers crowd to be not that useful. They're a physical embodiment of it, and they're also a way back in. It makes it bioavailable for people wherever they happen to be. I mean, now that it's only been a month and a bit, having been in Australia, but books cost about, even converting it, 3 times the price they did in London. Yeah. No one here grew up with stories. I don't know if you've heard the Cat Vincent episode or the one with Mog or anything, where they're just in libraries in, rundown South Wales, and there are these glass cabinets filled with all these Crowley books in a public library in South Wales. That doesn't. I'm having a bit of bibliophilia withdrawal, let me tell you.
We'll send you a care package, Gordon.
Great. All right, well, guys, this has been huge fun. In terms, what do you? We mentioned Kath's book, but we might as well talk about it a little bit more. What do you guys got coming up? That and where can people, find you? We'll do that bit. Have a chat.
Okay, well, obviously, with HadeanPress.com is our website. We've just released a few new pamphlets today, actually.
I saw that.
Yes, one you might like, Cyprianic Cartomancy.
Yes, that's yours, wasn't it? I figured that was... when Jose's book came out, Jake and I had long discussions, because he was in love with the cartomancy in it as well. And I'm glad someone's put that together, again, to make it, dare I say, bioavailable. I'm looking forward to that.
Yes. I could talk for hours about the Cyprian book and Cyprian. Okay,
no. I do talk for hours about the Cyprian book.
Gosh.
Actually, let's do that. How did you guys find Jose, or did he find you? We'll go back to, sorry, if Kath's listening, sorry, Kath, we'll talk about your book in a few minutes.
Yes, well, Jose found us. I can't remember how. It just came in as a submission like any other thing. We accepted it because Jose's writing is amazing. He's
so funny. That's why his commentary was just had me in tears in places. It was just, brilliant.
Yeah, I had no particular affinity with Saint Cyprian. We'd published Conjure Man all these lovely pamphlets, and Nick Friswold's pamphlet on Cyprian, and it was just another thing that we had published that I had to. I always like to research what we're publishing if I'm not familiar with it already. So that was just another one of them. And then Jose's book came along and wrecked my whole life. Just destroyed me.
In the production of it, or in like
the production of it. Well, I don't know. I don't know the production of it. I approached it like any other book. La la la. I'm going to start editing this and looking for typos and correcting grammar. And
Ursula said to me, it struck home to her because you read a lot of the old grimoires and it says, like find a black hen. And to the modern sensibility, they say, well, how the hell do we do that? But at the time, we were living in rural France, and so things like to make a homunculus, you need a pile of dung.
The tiny devil.
It's pretty easy to find a pile of dung when you're living in rural France.
We had one in the field next door. I used it quite extensively to make tiny devils. Yeah, there was that aspect of it. Like suddenly all this stuff made sense. I mean, it's not pleasant, but you have all these spells and recipes that require you to go out and kill a cat. Well, in rural France, a cat, there's thousands of them, feral, running around. I can see the mind of someone, in the 1800s or earlier, it being nothing to them to catch one of these feral cats and do the business with it. And because there's no sentiment in the peasant lifestyle. It's totally about survival. And vipers.
You'd be killing wild cats to protect your chickens anyway. Like it sounds more to sentiments to the internet,
now.
Which is 70% cat. It sounds mortifying. But if you have to kill wild cats to protect your geese, well, not geese, they'll definitely protect themselves. But chickens and so on. Yeah, Australia is overrun with feral cats.
Hesitate to kill vipers when they came into the garden, because they were going to get our chickens or the cats or whatever. Well, mostly the chickens would have killed it, but there's just no question. You're not gonna hug a viper, are you? You're going to kill it before it kills you. So there was that aspect of it. Suddenly all this stuff just opened up to me, I think southwestern France the landscape isn't terribly different from northern Iberia. So, it just felt like all of these things would work there as well, but it was so much more than that. It was as I worked on this book, I say this kind of jokingly because I would never claim to be something I'm not, but I feel like I became an accidental Cyprianista because Saint Cyprian, I'd feel him at my back watching me, and it got quite unpleasant until I made peace with him by doing some of the things in the book. I had to actually use the book as I was laying the book out in order to find some peace, and it came out on the 29th of May, I believe it was. And I had this great exhalation of relief. Like, thank God that's over. But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Within a month of that release, my computer died, my Mac. I'd worked on a Mac my whole life. I had to get my head around a PC. So that whole bit of my life was gone. And my mother died. Which, if you read the book of St. Cyprian, and you read it all the way to Jose's conclusion, where he's discussing the devil and what the devil actually represents, which is that sort of freedom that all of the downtrodden seek. Well, my mother's death was the most liberating thing that could possibly have ever happened to me. So it was just this incredibly horrible, but yet astoundingly magical time in my life, and this book, I hope to be buried with a copy of it because it means that much to me.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say claiming or not claiming the Cyprianista thing, you might have heard the discussion with Jose already. Cyprian wanted this book out, and so you were part of that process. So of course you were standing behind you.
Well. Yeah. They say the spirits ride you. Well, I felt like the saint was riding me, and I still do.
Well,
sometimes.
he's quite hands-on, it turns out, about incorporating him into books in a way that few other things are. But I guess in life, being a bibliophile and actually interested in well, they weren't grimoires at the time, but magical texts and so on, there's an element of standing over the shoulder micromanagement even that comes with the process. So that's fascinating. I mean, it's a wonderful book. It blew the top off my head when I got it. I think I bought it day one, and I've had this conversation with Jose and Jake and so on. It's something very fascinating that Jake's book, so Testament of Cyprian, is very different. It is, but you would expect to find that if there is a spirit, and in this case, the saint, behind it. There is this visceral, practical, bioavailable, almost invitational, though in an alarming way, actual magic that you can just pick up and do in Jose's book. And Jake's book is this, it's almost like you get Cyprian's library with it. So you get the context of where he is and the actual literary tradition of the things he was interested in. So there's deckhands in there. There's all this kind of really Eastern Mediterranean stuff. And they come out at more or less the same time. And it's, I mean, I've written 2 books at the one time, and so I kind of probably know what Cyprian went through with that process. But it is weird that 2 books with the same name come out, and there's no overlap, and in the most bizarre way, they're not complementary, but they match. They kind of click. As in, you get the sense that this is part of his project, and it's why he was micromanaging. I'm endlessly fascinated by just how that happened.
Well, he's got another one in the works. Humberto has one with another publisher that we're all waiting for.
Yes.
Now, there's a few more coming out. I think I spoke about this with Conjurman Ali, but St. Cyprian is a saint on a mission at the moment, and he does.
Yes.
He's
responsible. Like ayahuasca, yes.
Yes, he's totally responsible for the pamphlet we released today, Cyprianic Cartomancy. He said, "You're doing that?" I said, "All right, I'll do that."
He's the patron saint of a grimoire tradition, so his kind of. It's not surprising that he emerges, or re-emerges at least. Again, we need to be very specific about when we're talking about Western magic in this sense. It's not surprising that he is emerging to prominence at the same time that we are in some kind of publishing magical renaissance, and we have that, return to context and the re-enchantment of the world, because this is how it would be. He's kind of come to cure us of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And theosophy, yes.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, all that stuff. Cool. All right. I'm glad we got to talk about that. As I said, I could just keep talking about it. Probably shouldn't. It's getting late for you guys there. So we've spoken about the website. We have Cyprianic Cartomancy that came up. That will be in the show notes as well. And speaking of English Kabbalah, we have Kath Thompson's book. When's that one out?
That will be out August 22nd. That's a very special book, because what she's done is she's compiled the notes of James Lees, who was one of the founders of this particular branch of English Kabbalah, which...
The discoverer.
Yeah, the discoverer of it, if you will, and the most important figure in it, Brother Leo. And she's written them out in this book form, and it's when Dis introduced me to the English Kabbalah, there was a website, Jim Lees and his crew had a website up, which is now gone, and it would change. Every month they'd take a bit down and put something different up. I don't know if it every month, but every so often. And I trolled that website, just trying to glean. It was like gleaning the wisdom of the master. Like when we saw that he had passed last year. I didn't know him. I didn't know any of his crew other than Jake, and it was a very sad moment. I'm sure it was sad for many other people who did know him, but I just thought, all of that wisdom, where's it gone? And then there's Kath in our inbox of, and asking if we'd like to publish this book she's written based on his notes. And I was in tears. I'm like, yes, yes, I will have this.
So yes, we've got Kath's book coming out. She's got a few more lined up. We've got something on more demonology from Humberto coming up.
Well, we've got Conjure Codex 3 in the autumn. We've got Pandemonium by Jake in the autumn. That's a spirit catalogue that's immensely... It's so detailed like Jake does. It's dense. It's not a long work, but it's so dense.
Yeah.
The spiritists among us will love it to bits. Matt Laws has another one, 10 Spheres of Imperfection. And Jose's Biblioteca Valenciana is in the works.
Yay.
That I am fondly calling that the big red brick because, well, I just think that's like right.
Well, guys, this has been a wild ride. Thank you very much, and thank you for all your hard work. And
thank you.
Thanks, Gordon.
And we shall speak again.
Okay.
All right.
And that's how you do that. Haunted dolls, ultraterrestrials, boiling pins to curse your neighbours, Jason Miller's parties, doing battle in the French countryside, and otherwise getting vigorously Cyprianed. Something to say about the episode? You know what to do. Head on over to runesoup.com or the Runesoup Facebook page. And if you like this sort of thing, please do subscribe on YouTube or in your favourite podcatcher. And or you can simply say hello on Twitter, where I am Gordon, Gordon, _White, WHITE. Until next time.